A stray dog wouldn't leave old man's doorstep. Then he discovers why and breaks down in tears. Billy Walker had always been a man with a big heart, a quiet yet noble soul who never hesitated to lend a hand. In his small countryside community, he was known as the neighbor you could count on. From fixing broken fences to delivering groceries to the elderly, Billy's days were filled with small acts of kindness that brightened the lives of those around him. Despite his humble demeanor, Billy carried a profound loneliness. His wife had passed away years ago, and his only sibling, Michael, had left an unfillable void in his heart after his untimely death. The solace Billy found was in his daily routines. He woke at dawn, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat on his front porch overlooking the rolling fields. Life moved at a gentle pace here, and Billy liked it that way. But one frosty morning, something unusual disrupted his peaceful existence. A golden retriever sat at the edge of his porch, its fur dull and unkempt, its eyes locked on Billy with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. The dog didn't bark or whine. It simply sat there, as though it had been waiting for him. Billy sipped his coffee, eyeing the creature with curiosity. "Where'd you come from, fella?" he murmured. But the dog gave no indication of recognition or response. Billy dismissed it as a passing stray, but when he went inside to prepare breakfast, the retriever didn't leave. Hours passed, and the dog remained in the same spot. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Billy stepped outside again. The dog was still there, curled up but alert, its gaze following him as he moved. "You're a stubborn one, aren't you?" Billy muttered, shaking his head. He fetched a bowl of water and some leftover meatloaf, placing it near the dog. To his surprise, the retriever hesitated, sniffing the food cautiously before eating. The next morning, the dog was there again, and the next. By the end of the week, it was clear the animal had no intention of leaving. Billy asked around the village, but no one seemed to know where the dog had come from. "Probably abandoned," one neighbor suggested. Billy's heart ached at the thought. Despite his initial reluctance, he began to accept the dog's presence as part of his routine. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," he said one morning, scratching behind the retriever's ears. The dog leaned into his touch, its tail wagging gently. Weeks turned into months, and the golden retriever became a fixture in Billy's life. It still preferred the porch to the inside of the house, but Billy noticed it followed him everywhere. When Billy walked into town, the dog trotted a few steps behind. When he worked in the garden, it sat nearby, watching him intently. One rainy afternoon, Billy stood on his porch, gazing at the wet fields. The dog sat beside him, its fur damp but unbothered by the rain. "You remind me of someone," Billy said aloud, his voice tinged with melancholy. The dog tilted its head, as if it understood. "My brother, Michael. He was loyal just like you." Billy often found himself talking to the retriever, sharing stories about his past, his late wife and his brother. The dog never responded, of course, but its presence was a comfort. Billy began to feel as though the animal was watching over him, though he couldn't explain why. One day, while cleaning out an old storage shed, Billy came across a worn photograph of himself and Michael. He brought it back to the porch, showing it to the retriever. "See this? That's my brother, best friend I ever had." The dog sniffed the photo, then looked up at Billy with its soulful eyes. Billy chuckled, shaking his head. "You wouldn't understand, would you?" But deep down he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something extraordinary about the dog. It was as though the universe had sent it to him for a reason, though he couldn't yet fathom what that reason might be. That stormy night marked a turning point for Billy Walker, a quiet man who had lived decades with a steady rhythm of solitude and small joys. But the golden retriever, which had inexplicably appeared at his doorstep and stayed, was about to change his life in ways he never imagined. The wind howled like a restless spirit as dark clouds loomed over Billy's countryside home. Rain hammered against the windows, and the occasional flash of lightning illuminated the small living room, where Billy sat reading a tattered old book. The golden retriever, whom Billy had yet to name, was curled up on the porch, unbothered by the storm. Billy glanced out the window, muttering, "You should come inside, you know." "Not that you'd listen to me." The dog raised its head briefly at his voice but didn't move. As the night deepened, Billy began to feel a strange pressure in his chest. At first he brushed it off, assuming it was just a sign of exhaustion, but within minutes the discomfort grew sharper, spreading to his left arm and up to his jaw. Panic set in as he recognized the symptoms, a heart attack. He tried to stand, but his legs gave out beneath him, sending him sprawling onto the floor. Gasping for air, he looked toward the coffee table where his phone lay, just out of reach. He clawed at the carpet, inching toward it, but the pain was unbearable. Tears welled in his eyes as he realized he might not make it. Meanwhile, outside, the golden retriever was restless. Despite the torrential rain and howling wind, it paced back and forth on the porch, its ears twitching as if it could sense Billy's distress. Suddenly, a loud crash of thunder seemed to galvanize the dog. It leapt up and began pawing at the door, whining urgently. When Billy didn't respond, the dog reared back and slammed its body against the door. The old wooden door, weakened by years of wear, gave way under the dog's determined efforts. It burst into the living room, shaking water from its fur as its keen eyes took in the scene. Billy lay motionless on the floor, his hand outstretched toward the phone. The dog barked sharply, a sound filled with urgency and determination, but Billy was too weak to respond. The retriever acted swiftly. It jumped onto the coffee table, nudging the phone with its nose until it slid off the edge and landed near Billy's hand. But Billy still couldn't move. Realizing this, the dog grabbed the phone delicately in its mouth and placed it directly into Billy's trembling fingers. Billy's vision blurred, but he managed to press the emergency number before collapsing completely. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker, but Billy couldn't respond. The dog, sensing the importance of the sound, began barking into the phone, a series of sharp, insistent yelps that caught the attention of the operator. "We're dispatching help right away," the operator assured. Minutes felt like hours as the golden retriever stayed by Billy's side, licking his face and nuzzling his hand in an effort to keep him conscious. When the paramedics arrived, they were stunned to find the dog standing protectively over Billy, its golden fur soaked, but its eyes fierce and determined. As the medics worked to stabilize Billy, one of them remarked, "If it weren't for this dog, he wouldn't have made it." They loaded Billy onto a stretcher, and the dog followed closely, refusing to leave his side. At the hospital, Billy's condition was stabilized, and the doctors informed him he'd survived a severe heart attack. "You're lucky," one doctor said. "Another 10 minutes, and it could have been a very different story." Billy, still groggy, smiled weakly. "It wasn't luck," he whispered. "It was him." The dog sat in the waiting area, its head resting on its paws as though it understood the gravity of the situation. Hospital staff brought it water and food, charmed by its loyalty. When Billy was finally well enough to see visitors, the retriever was the first to enter his room. As soon as it saw him, its tail wagged furiously, and it climbed onto the bed, licking his face with fervent relief. Tears streamed down Billy's cheeks as he hugged the dog tightly. "You saved my life, didn't you?" he murmured. The dog let out a soft whine, pressing its head against his chest. The story of Billy and the golden retriever spread quickly through the small community. Neighbors and friends were amazed at the dog's intelligence and loyalty, but Billy couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Why had the dog appeared at his doorstep in the first place? What had drawn it to him so persistently? As he recovered, Billy decided to delve deeper into the mystery. What he discovered would change the way he saw the dog and his own life forever. Billy Walker's recovery marked the beginning of a remarkable journey of discovery. While the golden retriever had undoubtedly saved his life, Billy couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random act of loyalty. There was something deeply intentional, almost fateful about the dog's presence in his life. As he sat on his porch one crisp morning, sipping his coffee with the dog lying contentedly at his feet, Billy found himself lost in thought. The dog's unwavering gaze seemed to hold secrets, as if it were waiting for Billy to piece together a puzzle he didn't even know existed. One day, while stroking the dog's soft fur, Billy decided to take the first step toward solving this mystery. "You've got a story, don't you?" he murmured. Determined, Billy began asking around town, showing pictures of the dog to neighbors and acquaintances. "Have you seen him before? Does he belong to anyone?" he asked. Most people shook their heads, though a few recalled seeing a similar dog wandering the outskirts of town months ago. One elderly man, a retired park ranger named Tom, squinted at the photo. "That dog looks familiar," he said, scratching his chin. "I think I saw him a few years back near the old highway. There was an accident, a bad one. A young man didn't make it. I remember because there was a dog just like this one at the scene, sitting by the wreckage." Billy's heart skipped a beat. "What happened to the dog?" Tom shrugged. Don't know. After they towed the car, it disappeared. Guess it might have been the owner's dog. The mention of the accident lingered in Billy's mind. Could it be possible that this dog had some connection to the crash? The idea seemed far-fetched, yet the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Billy's curiosity drove him to dig deeper. He visited the local library, poring over old newspapers and records. It didn't take long to find an article about the accident Tom had mentioned. The young man, whose name was listed as Mark Thompson, had died tragically when his car skidded off the road during a heavy rainstorm. Billy's breath caught as he read further. Mark had been returning from a charity event when the accident occurred. The article described him as a kind-hearted individual who went out of his way to help others. The photograph accompanying the piece showed a smiling young man with a golden retriever by his side. Billy stared at the image, his hand trembling. It was unmistakably the same dog. But why had the dog come to him? What was the connection? Then it hit him like a bolt of lightning. Years ago, Billy had helped a young man stranded on the side of the road during a rainstorm. His car had broken down, and Billy had driven him to a nearby repair shop. Could Mark and this young man be one and the same? Billy couldn't shake the possibility, and it consumed his thoughts. He decided to visit Mark's family, whose address he found in the obituary. The house was a modest one, surrounded by a neatly kept garden. An older woman answered the door, her eyes filled with a quiet sadness that had likely lingered since her son's death. "Mrs. Thompson?" Billy began hesitantly. "My name is Billy Walker. I think I might have met your son Mark years ago. I have his dog." The woman's eyes widened as she glanced at the golden retriever sitting obediently beside Billy. Tears welled up as she knelt to embrace the dog. "Buddy," she whispered, "you're alive." Billy explained everything, the dog's sudden appearance, its heroic actions during his heart attack, and his own efforts to uncover its past. Mrs. Thompson listened intently, her hands trembling as she stroked Buddy's fur. "Mark always said Buddy was special," she said. "After the accident, Buddy ran off. We thought he'd been hit by a car or lost forever, but he must have found his way back to you because he recognized you. Mark used to talk about the kind man who helped him that night. That was you, wasn't it?" Billy nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't realize. I never thought that small act of kindness would come full circle like this." Buddy's story quickly became the talk of the town. People were amazed at the depth of loyalty and intelligence the dog had displayed. For Billy, the experience was life-changing. He no longer felt alone. Buddy was more than a pet. He was a guardian, a reminder of the interconnectedness of all lives. As Billy sat on his porch with Buddy by his side, he couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude. "You've given me a second chance," he said softly, "and I'll spend the rest of my days making it count." Billy Walker's life took on a new purpose after his extraordinary discovery of Buddy's past. The bond between the old man and the golden retriever deepened in ways that Billy never anticipated. It wasn't just a matter of companionship anymore. It was about honoring a connection that spanned years and symbolized the incredible power of kindness and gratitude. Billy began to share the story of Buddy with anyone who would listen. He visited schools, community centers, and even local radio stations, recounting the miraculous events that had unfolded. Buddy became a symbol of hope and resilience, inspiring people to believe in the power of small, selfless acts. One day, a local journalist approached Billy with an idea. "Your story deserves a wider audience," she said. "Have you ever thought about writing a book?" Billy was hesitant at first. He wasn't a writer and wasn't sure he could do justice to Buddy's story, but the journalist offered to help, and together they began documenting the incredible journey that brought Buddy to Billy's doorstep. The book, titled Buddy's Blessing, became an unexpected hit. It resonated with readers across the country, many of whom shared their own stories of animal loyalty and the extraordinary ways kindness had changed their lives. Proceeds from the book were donated to animal shelters and rescue organizations, a decision Billy insisted on. "It's what Buddy would want," he said with a smile. As time passed, Billy and Buddy's influence grew. Billy, inspired by Buddy's courage, decided to take on a more active role in his community. He started volunteering at local animal shelters, helping care for stray dogs and advocating for better adoption programs. Buddy, ever the faithful companion, became a fixture at these events, his presence attracting people from all walks of life. One particularly memorable event was a fundraiser for a new shelter in the area. Buddy's story was the highlight of the evening, and his gentle demeanor won over even those who had never owned a pet. By the end of the night, the shelter had raised more than enough money to begin construction. "Buddy's magic strikes again," Billy said with a laugh, scratching the dog's ears. As the years went by, Buddy aged gracefully, his once bright coat now streaked with grey. Billy, too, felt the passage of time, but remained energized by the mission they had embarked on together. He often marveled at how a simple act of kindness had not only saved his life, but had also set in motion a chain of events that touched countless others. In his later years, Billy wrote another book, this one focused on the lessons he had learned from Buddy. Titled The Golden Thread, Lessons from a Life Tied to Kindness. It explored themes of gratitude, perseverance, and the profound connections that can exist between humans and animals. The book became a bestseller, cementing Billy and Buddy's legacy as symbols of hope and humanity. When Buddy passed away peacefully one summer evening, Billy was heartbroken, but also profoundly grateful for the years they had shared. "You've done more for me than I could ever repay," he whispered, laying a hand on the dog's still form. He buried Buddy in a sunny spot in his backyard, planting a golden maple tree to mark the spot. Billy continued to honor Buddy's memory through his work, finding solace in the knowledge that their story had inspired so many. He often visited the tree, sitting beneath its shade and reminiscing about the dog that had changed his life forever. Even in his final days, Billy spoke of Buddy with a sparkle in his eye. "He wasn't just a dog," he would say. "He was a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, can ripple out in ways we can't begin to imagine." Buddy's story lived on, carried by those who read Billy's books, heard his talks, or simply found inspiration in the tale of an old man and a stray dog whose lives became inextricably intertwined by an act of kindness.